Welcome back to Drive Your Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Master Coach Carrie Marshall, and it's time to go after those goals.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Carrie Marshall, and today what we're going to talk about is breakups. Now, I know that as a goal coach, you probably weren't expecting that breakups was going to be something that we would talk about on this podcast, but when you're going after a goal, there are so many things that you actually need to break up with. And this came up for one of my clients this week. We were coaching and she's going after making $1 million in her business. She has an amazing business and it's really set up for success. But what I noticed this past week was that she was kind of doing these things that were her old self that helped her set up the business. And so at one point I said to her, okay, did you understand or do you know that that was your old self doing those actions? And she kind of stopped and said, yeah, I get it, but... And then she used all of these excuses. And I said, it looks like you need to break up with your past self in order to allow space for that new version of yourself that knows exactly what to do. And this really blew her mind for a couple of different reasons. Number one is that so often we talk about breaking up with things or patterns, but we never really talk about breaking up with our own self. We talk a lot about relationships with self, but you have to remember that there is always going to be different versions of yourself. Like, let's go extreme with this and think about the different versions of yourself from when you were a child to who you are now. My husband and I always love to tease each other that we would not have dated if we would have known each other in high school. We actually do come from the same hometown, but there were two different high schools. We were different ages. But I knew a lot of the people that he did, and he knew a lot of the people that I did. And it was just interesting that we never really crossed paths. But I think it was a good thing because that version of myself definitely would have not meshed with the version that he was. And so we do have all of these different versions of ourselves, but so often we don't intentionally think about breaking up with that version of ourselves. So let me give you a little bit more of a specific example. So my daughters are dancing right now. I'm a dance mom. I never thought I'd say that. Be open to possibility in your life, my friends. And I noticed that one of my daughters was doing something that she did when she very first started dancing. And so when I asked her, I said, so why are you doing that move that way? And she's like, well, because when I started, I didn't know if I was going to fall, so I always had to catch myself, right? She always was ready to catch herself. I said, when was the last time that you fell doing that move? And she really had to think about it. It's been a year, maybe 2 years, but she's still doing that. And so I had her close her eyes and I said, I want you to do the move now. And I want you to just think about who's showing up for that move. And so she did it and she tried to catch herself. And I said, okay, who is that showing up? And she goes, yeah, that's the scared version of myself, the scared dancer who doesn't really know what she's doing. And I said, okay, so then we kind of visualize, who are you now? You haven't fallen in 2 years. And so I kind of walked her through it and then I had her do it again. And it was beautiful. She didn't even try and catch herself. She completed the turn. It was awesome. So the reason that we talk about this is because there's probably areas in your life that you're trying to catch yourself, right? Oftentimes what happens is that lower brain, that lower version of ourself shows up for safety reasons. So for instance, if we go back to that example of my client, the reason that she was doing these actions was because she was scared. She'd never done the action like we were talking about in her business before. And so she really got nervous about that it wouldn't work, that she didn't know what she was doing. All of these things started to come up for her. But what we really want to be able to see is that that's going to come, your old version is going to come in for safety. So your old version is going to tell you let's just kind of play small, or let's do it this way because we've always done it this way. We know that it works. Like my client or my daughter who was trying that turn, it's like that old version shows up for safety. So notice when your old past selves are showing up for safety. And the first thing that I want to have you ask that is like, why? Why does this version of me need to show up? I had one client that was meeting some new people, and she said that she automatically went into this like very small version of herself. Now she's a public speaker. She has like 40,000 people that follow her on Instagram. Like she is a very, very well-known person in that sphere. And she says that it's really easy to show up in those areas where people know who she is. And so she shows up a certain way. But when she was in this new environment, what happened was the old version of herself showed up. So she started to play small and she was quiet and she got really nervous and anxious and was kind of like wondering when she could leave. Luckily for her, she kind of noticed that this older version of herself was showing up. And so she said, okay, what doesn't feel safe about this? Right? Like I said, usually older versions of ourselves show up when there's a safety, when we have something that doesn't feel safe. Well, her thought was that nobody would want to talk to her because nobody knew who she was. And so when she was able to see that felt unsafe for her, or that felt really uncomfortable, then she was kind of able to sit down in a corner by herself for a minute, kind of walk herself through the process of like, okay, that's not a problem. We're totally safe. This is a lovely group of people. I bet there's really fascinating people. So it took her about, 2 to 4 minutes to just kind of sit there and process for a minute. And then she basically reset, right? We've talked about this before of resetting our expectations. And so she reset the expectations, took a deep breath, let it out, and then she was ready to go. She had a really fun time, met some really great people. So I want you now for yourself to think about where your old version of you is showing up. This could be when you're going after your goal. It could be you're trying something new and you've never done it before. And so that old version of you shows up. But identify why that version of you thinks that it's necessary for it to show up in that realm. Sometimes I like to envision a bus, and I like to put different things on this bus. But here's one kind of a reiteration of this, or one example of this. Sometimes that bus is filled with different versions of myself. And so when I look at the bus, I'm like, everybody's welcome here. You can ride along, you can have opinions, but who's driving the bus? And then who's in the passenger seat? Those are the two main places that I like to look for. I usually like my current self to sit in the driver's seat and my future self to sit right next to me in shotgun. So when an older version of me comes up and pushes its way either into the driver's seat or that passenger seat, I'm always very curious why. I want to know what feels so necessary for that version of myself to drive what the actions, the feelings, what we're doing, what we're thinking. So when you find that you have these older versions of yourself, this is where the breakup needs to happen. Just like any breakup with a friendship, a romantic relationship, even leaving a job, we want to be able to set very, very clearly that this is no longer necessary, healthy, needed, and I need to leave. Like, I love when we talk about relationships. I had one friend that was like, I broke up with him and he kept like calling and like he'd show up. And I was kind of like, well, did you like really break up with him? And she's like, well, I said like I couldn't hang out anymore. And I'm like, well, that's very different than like the actual conversation of breaking up. So when you have this, I want you to be very clear with yourself that like that version of you, it's welcome on the bus, like I said, but you need to break up with it, right? Oh, your opinions, your actions, your mindset is no longer needed here. So I'm going to need to break up with you. You're going to need to go here. I have this new relationship. And then I want you to really get clear about why the new relationship is important to you. Maybe it's more healthy, right? Maybe you have a healthier relationship with yourself now or with your future. And so you can even say like, I found somebody else. I don't know what your self-talk is, but sometimes that's really helpful for me and some of my clients to actually be able to have that conversation. So I want you to see where you're showing up in your past self and where we need to break up with that version because it's no longer serving you. There are going to be actions that you're taking, mindsets that you're bringing along with you that are no longer helpful. I know for me, one of the kind of older versions of me likes to say, I don't know. And so anytime that pops back in, I have to be like, oh, I broke up with you, right? It's just like breaking up with, like I said, like a romantic relationship. We just have to like be like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. So if I don't know shows up, I'm always like, oh, no. I broke up with you. Why are you here? Why do you think you're necessary in my life? And then once again, I just tell it like, no, you're not welcome here. We broke up a long time ago. So I'm going to need you to go away. I hope this has been helpful. Come on over to Drive Your Thoughts Coaching on Instagram. It's been so much fun to get to know you all. I had a couple of podcast listeners reach out and say, hey, I'm here. You told me to follow you, but it's been really fun. So we're going to continue this conversation and tell me what past version of yourself do you need to break up with that's not serving you anymore? I'll see you later on Drive Your Thoughts. Bye. Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If you're ready to get in the driver's seat of your own life, you can come and follow me at Drive Your Thoughts Coaching on Instagram, or come and see more ways to work with me at driveyourthoughts.com.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.